Okay, hello, welcome. I have with me here Roger and Shawn from meditative.dev. And yeah, welcome to the show. And just to get everyone who's listening to this on board with who you are and who maybe have not come in touch with your content, just quickly introduce yourself, whichever way you like. And yeah, let the listeners know who's partaking in this conversation today.
Yeah, gee, I never know how to answer this question. Because in one sense, I'm just a guy, but I have meditated a lot, and I'm really into phenomenology. And I host this online meditation group with Shawn called meditative.dev. Um, I claim to have pretty substantial insight into the awakening process and sort of very high well-being and inner equanimity and such. And I don't know, I'm really philosophical in nature, and I don't know. There's
Yeah,
more. I'll say that.
Yeah, so I guess I'm a kind of a long-term meditation practitioner also at this point, and I think Roger and I sort of bonded over phenomenology and kind of exploring this type of stuff. And yeah, I created this thing called meditative.dev, which is this initiative where we do weekly sessions, among other things. Um, I guess like a year and a half ago, really started doing that. And yeah, I also research meditation academically. So I guess that's the other thing. Other than that, kind of as Roger says, I don't, it's kind of like how to answer this question. I don't know. I'm just a person who's interested in these things and kind of wants to share what I
yeah,
learn and discover, I guess.
yeah, right. And I think also part of this work is the outcome that this becomes more and more difficult with time, like to define, like, okay, yeah, depending on who you're speaking to, you know what's expected, but you could answer this question in more and more different ways than you usually think when you start out with this work, maybe. So yeah, I definitely can understand this. How did you two get to know each other?
Do you want to?
Yeah, so basically, I did a meditation retreat a number of years ago, and I ran into some people there that we kind of like hit it off, and I kept tabs with them afterwards. And Roger wasn't one of those people, but Roger happened to get to know one of those people in Barcelona. Um, and then somehow we kind of created this sort of online Sangha kind of meditation community group. And and yeah, I don't know. We just sort of organically started talking more and more about kind of um, meditation and consciousness and what we found interesting about that. And yeah, I think it just went from there. I don't know, Roger, what you want to add.
Yeah, well, my side of things, it was cool because up until that point, I'd really just been a solo practitioner. Didn't know anyone who was into meditation in the fervent way that I was. And so then, yeah, when I met Shawn, it was really nice to connect with someone who was like as nerdy about the phenomenology and still holding like high esteem for being rational and all these things. And we could just kind of geek out and talk about all the technical aspects. And yeah, and then Shawn sort of introduced me to other people. And yeah, because before that, I didn't have a sangha in that sense. So
Mm-hmm.
that's great.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, similar from my own history. Like when you start out, yeah, like kind of you're alone. Like this is very, very unique. Like not many people are into it, and then naturally, as you like go through the world with this big interest, like kind of in your mind and this lens, and then yeah, kind of you meet the people along the way that match these interests. Yeah, it's really interesting. And yeah, we will also later talk about more of what you mentioned, like Roger, you studied philosophy, and Shawn, you're working actually really researching meditation. I think and I hope we will have time that you can share some of that. But maybe first, as you already said, like you had met each other over this topic of meditation. Maybe you can share both like some of what you already experienced with meditation to give people like kind of a background of what makes you so fascinated about this. Like when did this really like take hold in your mind, this whole exploration of things in the phenomenal world?
It's such an interesting question, and
Sure.
it really, for me, felt like, I mean, I guess I've kind of always been interested in consciousness and ideas that kind of like reframed how I understood reality in some way. But like, I didn't have any practice that would let me explore that. But it's interesting because I kind of just started meditating like the typical person, like, 5 minutes a day or maybe 20 on a good day. Um, and as I do this, like, it just, I don't know, like somehow like stuff just starts snowballing. You start noticing more and more, and you become more and more curious about what's happening. And, eventually I was like, I need to do a retreat. I can't keep, I have to do a retreat. And then it was, doing first retreat and then again and again and again. So it's almost like it sort of just like pulled me in, really. Um, yeah.
Yeah, for me, yeah, maybe there's a type of persona of people who are, yeah, hyper philosophical, super interested in the nature of reality, and yeah, studied philosophy, and always trying to speculate on metaphysics and ontology, just what exists, how does it exist, and you can do all the theorizing you like, but to really intimately come to an understanding of these things, you have to engage in the first person uh, project here of investigating the mind and coming to see things more phenomenologically. Um, but kind of what kicked it off for me was I had a insane magic mushroom experience that blew open the doors of perception, and I was never the same again after that. Luckily, things turned out all right for me, but I couldn't not sort of go down this path then and try to investigate. And I wanted to um, more skillfully, subtly investigate the mind, and I found meditation as that sort of more gentle, progressive route, and to get sort of more detail on things. And then, yeah, as Shawn says, it just takes off, and you at some point you're on the path, and you've seen too much, and you can't get off. Yeah.
I really like both of your histories there with practice, kind of minus, like, I think a combination of both, kind of like dabbling a little bit in meditation first, but then for some reason having big psychedelic experiences that takes this to a whole nother level. Yeah, so really, really interesting. I can relate to that. Something you touched on, which leads me already to my next question, is as I'm on this channel mostly talking about meditation practices, I find that especially when I talk to people directly and when they are beginners, they are struggling a little bit to find a really compelling vision for this path. So maybe as you said, like you both felt this very intrinsic motivation to explore reality, but maybe over time, has this shifted for you? Have you found different motivations, or were you maybe surprised by the outcomes and now would say, oh, yeah, had I known that, that would be a great motivation. So maybe you could share some of your insights there.
Yeah, I kind of view like there's sort of two core motivations a lot of people approach this from. Is one, like we said, kind of wanting to explore reality, get at like what is this and what am I, and then another main one being wanting to reduce your suffering. and both of those can go together. But some people leaning more on one side or the other, they're kind of like, I just want to feel better in my mind and suffer less. And actually, I think if you really sort of go on this journey, it will answer a lot of those questions. And
Sorry, very quickly, I muted you guys and can't unmute you. Can you unmute yourself?
okay. Where
Yeah,
shall I
no,
go again?
just the last sentence.
Yeah, sorry if there's background noises. I'll mute myself sort of in
Okay.
between. Um, I forget what the last sentence was. Kick me off.
Um,
Like, can you hear me?
I think I was struggling with like trying to get the microphone to work
Oh,
and missed
okay.
it as well.
Well, I just say that, yeah, if you really do sort of go on this journey and meditate more and more, you do get revelations and insights into, yeah, what reality is at a deeper level. Plus, it does come with these benefits of dramatically reducing your suffering. Like it can do that, yeah, which is very worthwhile.
Yeah, I think I basically agree with Roger. They're sort of like the twin motivations of curiosity and improved well-being. And people can enter from one side or the other side, but ultimately they discover that both of those are kind of reasons to continue. I think um, it's it's also like for people that are starting off, it's difficult to overstate how much meditation changes literally everything in your experience of living. Like you think, oh, that's just a thing that'll do this little thing in my life or whatever. It'll, it's the same as the benefits like playing tennis or something might do to my life. But it really underlies, because it works on your attention and your perception. It underlies every single thing um, that you're involved in, like every day. And yeah, I find it's like difficult to communicate that, and there's sort of always a sense of like, if you only knew. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, great. What I get from both of your um, explanations there is that you start out with some kind of motivation, but then you also discover that it grows in certain ways into like even bigger motivations. At least for some time, like you see all these benefits, and from there you say, oh my God, this is more than I anticipated. There's more there to explore than I ever thought. So that definitely matches my experience. And um, like maybe defining this a little bit more specifically, would you say there is something people can really pursue as an end goal, or would you say this is, in your experience, more an open quest, an open exploration that like gets ever deeper?
um yeah, I mean, Roger and I think agree on this. It's, yes, at least for insight meditation, there is an end goal, and the end goal is fourth path. um yeah, I don't know, Roger, if you want to like go into more on that end goal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of want to appeal to both sides and sort of
Nice.
synthesize this. That I think there are sort of, yeah, definitive conclusions you can come to. There's certainly milestones you can reach, and but also let's be opening to an ever deepening process as well. But there are certain like limits you can reach. I think with, for example, going through the defabrication process where more and more layers of the mind stop manifesting and sort of shut down. That's not infinite. That does have an endpoint. So yes and no, and we can be specific about what exactly we're talking about.
And I think we can also go into that a little bit later when we talk about specific practices which lead you to like different outcomes, which some of them may have an endpoint and some others may not. Yeah, so I think it's great to have that perspective. Um, yeah, in that regard, maybe let's talk a little bit about practices. Like, what have you been doing in the past? what worked really well for you? What did you like about those practices? And maybe also as a second question, like what are you practicing now and what are you interested in exploring now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, on one hand, I think especially when I was starting, and this is generally true, is getting some concentration is really important. So, I mean, although it's like a very kind of, I don't know, almost like cliched practice at this time of just observing the breath, that definitely was important to starting. As far as more like insight investigation practices, I'm a really big fan of noting. So this kind of idea of you, as phenomena arises in awareness, you label it. So you could do this with specific categories, or you could do it descriptively. But in my opinion, yeah, it's definitely the practice that had the most kind of bang for the buck, so to speak.
How long did you engage in that practice?
See, it's interesting because I don't actually note all that much anymore. Um, However, there's this kind of period on the path, especially when you're going through the, let's say, like the more kind of challenging phases, what was typically talked about as the dark night. And I think like that really helped move me through that territory. Um, and for me, like that's where it's most, yeah, where it's just very important. I think as a practice, it can be really, really useful. After, I'd say, after stream entry, I think I stopped noting as much. I started more just paying attention to what was going on. I started kind of experimenting more with just kind of meditating on equanimity and things like this. But um, yeah, definitely going through the dark night noting was a massive boon.
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, the way I approached sort of meditation in the beginnings changed over the years and different to how it is now. In the beginning, I kind of took to it like I would sort of structure a workout regiment, and that, you know, one thing you can do when you go to the gym is that on a different day you're training a different muscle group. And so I would kind of do something similar with meditation, where on a different day I'd be training a different kind of technique, or different technique that focuses on bolstering a different type of cognitive faculty, those being concentration or metacognition, or equanimity, or your noticings per second. And I would just cycle and I just rotate. You know, it's like Mondays, you know, concentration day, Tuesdays, Vipassana, Thursday, meta, you know, whatever. Um, Now I think that can be helpful for people, but maybe I would be a bit more tactful and skillful with how I would advise people to approach this. Yeah, depending on what kind of phase you're in, and I agree a lot with what Shawn is saying. Yeah, in some of those tricky phases, noting can be really good. Yeah, I'm a big advocate for noting as well. Um, and then you said kind of what practices we're doing now. For myself, it's funny because I've reached a certain uh, place where my regular default state is so harmonious and nice as it is. The compulsion to meditate has really dropped off. I mean, I've really been an like ardent, avid meditator for a while, but then at some point I reached a point where like I'm just so good just being. I mean, I still meditate occasionally, and it's a lot of just sitting and being, and then having cessations and this. Now I'm much more interested in the like the cleaning up process, trying to work on how do I approach other people and social dynamics and my own behavior in that sense, and also my outward performance.
Yeah, you both hinted there at the fact that already, or after many years, I mean, I don't know if you can say already, but that your perception of your moment to moment experience has changed a lot compared to when you started out. Do you want to maybe touch a little bit upon how one could formulate this into words and give like people a taste of, okay, what can this probably lead to? I mean, if you say it's so nice or so pleasant moment to moment, like how would you describe, what are the differences? What was making it unpleasant before, maybe? What came or what dropped away? Maybe you can.
Yeah, I can give a bit of a highfalutin answer here. That I have a theory that as one progresses in meditation, we are more and more so de-objectifying experience, which means recognizing more and more that what you experience is not an objective feature of mind independent reality, but a part of the mind, but then also not a thing, not really a thing. And then there's a sort of continuous process of recognizing more and more. A lot of people have this sense that they're like a homunculus in their head, and the mind is kind of just in the head. They close their eyes, and there's these thoughts there, and maybe emotions are in their mind as well, but then everything else is outside of the mind. You know, that is a mind independent objective reality. And then you realize, oh, hang on, all of this is just perceptions and apparitions that are appearing and disappearing in my mind. And the sense of boundaries and the thickness and the rigidity of the appearance of phenomena of the seeing and the feeling and the thoughts and that soften up, and everything becomes much flowier, and that creates less resistance, less contraction, less tension in your overall whole sort of world simulation experience. A big part of this, I think, a big part of this process of significantly reducing your suffering is to recognize that there's no center to experience. So a lot of people have this sense that there is what I say is a single epistemic agent in the heart of experience, a single knower of which all information converges towards, and it has this like this stiffness to it. It's solid and it's there. Noticing that is actually not the case about the mind, that this is centerless, frees up a lot of just the energy flow. So things are just kind of passing through without colliding into hard objects. It's very much like that.
Yeah, that was really nicely put. I don't know if I have I don't think I have much to add to that. Maybe kind of just complimentary though is there's also this definitely the sense of we are the author of our actions and our thoughts and all of this that erodes progressively over time until it's just kind of it's actually it's just kind of like experientially impossible to believe in that anymore at some point. um, and that's where you get people saying, you know, like stuff is just it's just happening, like stuff is just happening, even the intentions to do things are just happening, and because you can perceive them clearly, um, like there's no confusion about that, it's just obvious that that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you go through this progress of insight, when you have these shifts, I know some people say it can come with a mental understanding of what you just understood, kind of. And sometimes it cannot, but you still get like kind of the change in perception. So would you say you can put into words maybe just some examples of what this sense of self in the experience is actually like. Because I mean, for most people it will be obvious that you are not constantly thinking I, or self somehow. So it's not a verbal thought. But at the same time it's also not really a specific feeling, because like your feelings change. You don't always feel like your head. So can you put into words what part of momentary experience is constituting to that kind of friction that creates the center point, or the self? I mean, if it's possible, something.
Yeah.
I think it is possible. We can certainly try. You know, you can never fully capture reality in words, but we can approximate. Um, I wonder if Shawn might have a good take on this, sort of being closer to I don't know, a center itself. Um,
Hmm. So yeah, I guess I could say it's something like, initially I felt like I was, as kind of Roger said, like trapped in my head. Um, and it's very, and sort of, yeah, this idea of like, okay, I'm directionally perceiving everything from my head outwards. Um, and then, and so with that, there's kind of this distinction of um, kind of self and other, let's say. And the thing is that over time, and often in sort of, yeah, at certain points like concrete steps, those distinctions just get far less clear. Um, there starts to enter more and more doubt of, yeah, well, I'm kind of, in my head and everything's kind of out there, but not as much as it was before. But that's the part that's maybe difficult to um, describe well. But you start getting experiences like, for example, normally if we close our eyes or something, we have a sense of like space, of directionality to experience and stuff like this. But once you start getting into meditative territory where you don't, like, there are moments where you recognize that you don't have a sense of space, you don't have a sense of like there and here, um, and that you can definitely say in those moments that something was happening, but because like you start to lose those kind of clear, oh, this is obviously me and this is obviously something else, and kind of more and more doubt and skepticism about that starts to kind of creep into your understanding over time. um, and then so it kind of moves into like definitely trapped in your head to kind of there's mm, something like a me that feels sort of like amorphous and somewhat flexible and more maybe moving and changing, and then that just gets progressively more and more kind of diffuse, and um, and then yeah, uh, eventually that can drop away.
Mm.
yeah, just to add on to this, I might introduce a kind of a structure I've thought of that is different types of identification that we can recognize and then cease to buy into. You alluded to something at the beginning, Laurie. It's about, well, we can have this conceptual sense of self. You can have this with using thought structures, verbalizing, well, I am English, or I am, somebody who plays football or something like that. And, people can really buy into those beliefs. And that's kind of like a top high level um, abstract form of identification that is, for most people, the easiest. I mean, it's not necessarily easy, but the easier ones to disidentify with and realize, oh, okay, those are just beliefs and they come and go, and I'm not always thinking that. But then you get past that and you get into identification of, well, I am kind of a being that persists through time. So you identify with, well, there was a me who was born, who continues to exist, and there's still the me now who will continue to exist in the future, and it's all the same me. And you can have that perception without putting it into words. And then we start sort of narrowing that horizon where you get to the point, well, are you still conceptualized, or not conceptual, are you still intuitively, viscerally kind of having this sense that the me a second ago is the me now who will be the me in 1 second? And then you kind of shorten that, and shorten that. Then there's a spatial sense of self. Yeah, like I am here and not there. And then, you can notice that move, right? You said like, well, you don't always feel like you're in your head. Maybe some people feel more like they're in their chest, or sometimes you feel more like you are your whole body. But even that can move. You can have out of body experiences. So I'm not even in the body. I'm in the corner of the room. Or you can feel like you are the totality of experience. Oh, I'm everywhere. Or that can shut off and you're not even everywhere, nowhere. And then what I said before, I think the subtlest form of self is this epistemic agent, just the raw sense that there is an experiencer in addition to experience. There is some subject that has some relation to object knowing. And then, I kind of see that as like a progressive um, de-objectification, de-identification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this really rings true from my own experience. I mean, I can really relate. I can have some experiences and memories of experiences that definitely fit into what you described. Um, and going from there, and as you already touched upon a little bit, is there are certain historical already existing models of how this process unfolds. And one thing that you mentioned is the four-path model of Theravada Buddhism, for example. Maybe if that's the one you like to use to explain this for people, or maybe you have some different ones that you found to represent how this process unfolded for you. Maybe you can just quickly touch a little bit upon them and give a few of the like kind of core ideas of them, and this will be really helpful for people, I think.
Yeah, I might just set this up because what's interesting is I think Shawn and I could diverge here, where our path has been different. For me, there were distinctive gestalt switches in which the whole lens of perception was changed, and the way the mind construed itself totally updated, and it was these more specific. Like I can remember a very specific time and date that things changed, and Shawn's journey seems to be subtler and more progressive with sort of less distinct moments, right?
Yeah, that's essentially, which is not to say for me that's always been the case, but it's definitely on the whole been more kind of gradual and evolving. Um, having which is interesting because I do think that the four path model, kind of the particularly Daniel Ingram's kind of revised version of it, which because I think kind of a lot of the traditional kind of understanding of fourth path sets up basically someone that achieves it like they're basically a saint by definition of, complete removal of things that I'm skeptical of. But even though the fourth path model, the kind of the more pragmatic Dharma version, is useful, I do think just a certain extent it is sort of also marked by perhaps by Ingram's experience of like very clear shifts. And it's true that just in my case, some things have been kind of very gradual, and where at some point I was perceiving in one way, and then without any kind of sharp change, at some point I realized, oh yeah, I'm not perceiving like that at all anymore. Like now my perception is really different. And just sort of, at some point, just kind of reflecting on how I perceived before and realizing that there had been that change. But again, it's kind of like, as you notice other people growing, where if you see them every day, you don't really notice the change, but suddenly if you're away for 6 months and then you look at them again, it's like, oh wow, you've really grown. It's like a kid, right? So I feel like I've kind of done that with myself a number of times over the path.
Related to that, you started out saying, okay, you were both very motivated for this work, like kind of intrinsically. You were just very curious about, okay, what's this perception, what's this world, what's reality like, or maybe what is in there in these practices. So that brings me to one question I would like to ask you, which is, how important are emotions in this work? Because the way I discovered this in practice is curiosity is kind of an emotion. It's something that is kind of in the body, and it is a live energy. It's like it's to the point. It has clarity in it. It brings something to the practice that is not that it could really be described as emotional energy, I have found. So describing and looking back on your history, and I know you also have experience with other meditators, how important is this whole emotional or subtle body in meditation practice?
I feel like in some sense it's like a very big question. That's a really big box. um, I feel like something at least like very general I can say is that positive emotional states are going to make practice more effective, and negative ones are going to make it more difficult and less effective. Um, so that's it. Just it pragmatically in terms of making kind of process or progress with insight meditation is an important thing to understand. And when Buddhism talks about the hindrances, um, these are kind of like obstacles that get in the way of the path, and they're kind of understood as um, like the generators perhaps of distractions that are keeping you, let's say, mind wandering and distracting you from like the investigative work you're trying to do. um, and these are generally with a lot of emotional content and negative emotional content, um, which also means that I feel like in this way, meditation is really complicated or complemented by other kind of developmental work. So I think stuff like, especially if there's a lot of kind of past emotional trauma and stuff like this, then people doing things like therapy is actually really going to help them become kind of more effective in meditating. And I think often when these things aren't resolved, people just sort of run into like a wall in their practice. And meditation isn't always the tool to get through that.
Could you quickly maybe explain a little bit more what such a wall would experientially feel like? What comes up in meditation where you would say, okay, maybe I have some work to do that lies outside of this specific meditation practice? How would you know?
So, one thing you can do is if you're paying attention to the type of thoughts you're having, I think that can be really helpful in figuring that out. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if, you know, regularly in your practice, kind of, let's say, what a particular person thinks about you, and kind of how you can better, let's say, present yourself to that person in your relationship with them. Like if something like that is just repeatedly coming up again and again, then there may be something you can do other than just try to let go of that thought to make progress there. So it's sort of like watch for the signs of like what is repeatedly coming up in practice. If you try to explore some part of your experience and you notice yourself just sort of emotionally overwhelmed to the point where you need to shut down, I mean, that's also a pretty clear sign that there may be something else you need to do there even before you can continue, because maybe you need a kind of softer or different approach, and meditation might not offer you that. I don't know what Roger's thoughts are.
Yeah, sort of just to tag onto that, I think if we are heading towards the sort of ultimate realization of nirvana, there is a barrier to entry where if you're practicing a meditation, but yeah, emotional content keeps coming up and you just can't let certain things go. They just keep appearing and distracting you. And it could be, yeah, you need to do some kind of other developmental work to deal with that in your psychology, because really to go the distance, we want such a clean peacefulness of mind that you can forget everything, really forget the whole world, forget your whole personal history, be able to just sit and let it all die down, and even kind of allow the self to die, and be at peace with that. But you see this, you see, yeah, people who like go on retreats and such, they kind of, they're practicing, but then it gets very emotional, and then that prevents them from sticking with the practice or going deeper, and so they may need to work on something else there.
Yeah, I really like how you both put that. Sometimes in meditation or Buddhist advice, you hear even like, okay, even those very beautiful states, they can become a hindrance. But I think for most people hearing that advice, it's probably too early to hear that. If you can cultivate and have lots of joy and positive states, and you every time you go into meditation and you love it, and you are in the spot for a very long time, that's a really good place to be in, I found. And I think this agrees with what you just both said there. So, yeah, great. On this path, and coming back to what you already mentioned, people on retreats, like in part of this path is often going to retreats. But then there's also most of the year where you're actually practicing at home by yourself, or maybe here and there you go to a group setting where you meditate together. What have you found is like the difference between a retreat and the practice at home? How much of your progress maybe can you attribute to a retreat versus like sitting at home? And yeah, just your thoughts on that topic.
I'd actually be curious to hear Roger's answer to this before I answer mine, actually.
Yeah, I think it would depend on the person. I do think I'm a bit of an outlier, and I just seem to be pretty naturally gifted at this kind of work. So I relativistically haven't done so many retreats, and I got stream entry before I ever did a retreat, just by myself, just kind of hours a day of sitting. I viewed doing long silent retreats as kind of like intensive boot camp for working my brain. Um, but you don't want to only do that and then not have a daily practice where you're sort of sustainably working on yourself, and then you just go really hard, once or twice a year, and then you're not doing anything for the other part of the year. Um, but you can make a lot of headway in retreats, and they're designed in such a way to give you just the optimal space. I mean, if they're run well, optimal space you just fully dedicate to the practice, and you can let yourself know, I don't have to think about or worry about anything else but this meditative practice, and just sit here and just do the work. And you can go through a lot of the stages of insight on retreat, which otherwise, if a retreat being a week or two in daily practice, otherwise it's going to take you months and months to go through these stages of insight. But for myself, maybe, I don't know, they were both pretty valuable, but you've got to also recognize that life is not a retreat, and you've got to live in this world. So, life becomes your practice as well. And not just sitting on the cushion, but also when you get off the cushion, walking around a daily life. So, yeah, I'm an advocate for both.
Nice. I, I think in my case that retreats were quite essential for me. I think the majority of kind of major kind of perceptual shifts and stuff like that for me did happen on retreat. I think, again, it, like, the need for retreats also depends somewhat on, what your daily practice also looks like. Like, if you're meditating multiple hours a day, then the need for retreats may be a lot less, or you might not need them at all. But if on a daily basis you're doing 20, 30 minutes, even an hour a day, like, it's, if you just think about the amount of time that you're meditating on retreat. So let's say like a typical kind of Vipassana Foundation Goenka retreat, there's something like 100 hours of meditation in 10 days, which is kind of more intense than other retreats, but still. And you think about, okay, so that's, more than a quarter of a year of daily meditation that you're doing in 10 days. But not only that, because you can get much more concentrated on retreat because it's so condensed. Also, like, the effectiveness of your practice, like, even each hour that you're on that retreat is just going to be much, much more. You're going to be much more focused than you are in your daily practice. So, like even if you just think of it that kind of way, it's not maybe that you need retreats, but understand how much work they're doing compared to daily practice, I guess I'd say. I think for most people, it's difficult with just daily practice to make substantial progress. And substantial progress is also kind of what motivates us to keep going. It's like lots of people, oh, I went on retreat, this incredible thing happened, and now I'm super motivated to continue, because it's like, oh, I saw that something big can happen. And sometimes daily practice doesn't give you that in the same way. It's yeah, especially when you're starting off, it's just like it's kind of like too normal in a way.
Yeah. Everything you said, really, I just got so many thoughts where I was like, yeah, exactly. So true from my own experience. Because, for example, the first 3 years without any retreats was just as you just said, Shawn. There is like definitely some benefit I could feel when I didn't meditate for like 2 weeks. There was something like something is off, like, but then you discover only after like several of these like weeks without meditation that, oh yeah, the meditation is doing something. I feel just more calm, better, like less stressed, like these benefits everybody can really understand. And so that's really what meditation got me without any retreats. But the first retreat I went on, I think after probably around 3 years of practice, got me instantly this dissolution of any sense of space, like within 1 week. And I mean, I went to the most extreme. I went to a silent darkness retreat, which is
Wow.
kind of, I think, not recommended, but I mean, it was super powerful. So yeah, when as soon as the light went on and the kind of the world reappeared, it was like, okay, that's me. Like definitely, I cannot make any distinction anymore. But yeah, it was a huge change, and so I can definitely agree with those things you just mentioned. Um, so you would say both like, okay, retreat is kind of, if you're not as gifted as Roger, maybe retreats are like a boost to your practice. They are like a very potent tool. And part of this power that it has, I think has Rob Boubert has really put it well into words, is the view you have on the retreat. It's, you make it kind of something very special in your mind as well. Like you hold this time as sacred. And again, as we said earlier, this does something to the energy you bring with you. Like you're just, I'm here for this only. But then also you can take this and say, let me try to make the difference between my own practice at home and maybe even daily experience and the retreat a little less. Like, let me bring my daily life up to that kind of energy I felt on the retreat. And I found that really helpful. And that's something very valuable you can get out of a dedicated retreat period. Coming to like these tools that are very powerful, what are your thoughts on psychedelics? They are often talked about in meditation circles or spiritual circles. So maybe share some of your experiences, maybe your opinions. People are always really interested in that.
I'll go. I'll go. It's a big topic, and I take it very seriously. I take psychedelics very seriously. I think there's a lot of recklessness with people taking high doses, and they're not ready for that. And these can be really traumatizing experiences. So I issue that caveat. Psychedelics were certainly essential for me. They, yeah, opened up certain pathways and showed me things that probably wouldn't have gained access to or known about otherwise before. But then for me, it was about how can I relearn what I experienced on psychedelics without, and sort of trying to um, get to a similar state of mind via meditation. Um, all of my long lasting insights that stuck around were through meditation rather than on psychedelics. That may not be the case for everyone. I'm sure there's some people who, yeah, they've used psychedelics and they had an insight and it did stick with them. It did sufficiently integrate even after the drug wore off. Typically, I don't think that's the case for most people. And I sort of see a difference between people who kind of so heavily lean on psychedelics rather than a slower, more skillful practice like meditation, in sort of a difference in maturity and precision of like how well they understand the mind, and getting into the phenomenology of things. I'm sure there are exceptions, but my general kind of the pattern that I recognize there is you perceive a difference in maturity and level of wisdom who from the really sort of long time meditators and those who are just kind of the psychonauts. Not that there aren't exceptions either way, but that's what I view. I don't know if Shawn thinks similarly.
Hmm. Yeah, I quite like what you said. I also haven't had what I'd say particularly lasting change through psychedelics. I mean, there are changes, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's difficult. I feel like this area is one area where actually research on it is only kind of happening very recently. It's like sort of like research on meditation took off and research on psychedelics took off. And at some point, people started going, "Oh yeah, there like similar things are going on, aren't they?" And so there's been this sense for a while, but I think it's only recently that that's being looked at more clearly. But I think that sometimes psychedelic trips, if you're kind of already on the path, they can, and you're kind of at one point, they can kind of like nudge you or tip you over into the next one. That's something that I think they can do. So kind of there's this understanding of the insight stages, right? And I think that, maybe if you're kind of like in one, they might nudge you into the next one. And I think they can also do something for teaching the mind what more kind of defabricated, more open, expansive states are like. Because if like you've always lived in this sort of like contracted kind of like tense kind of way, and then you can have a psychedelic experience where you get ego dissolution or something like this, and then what you can do is you can like something in you does remember that experience after you're done the trip, and you can kind of use that to like, okay, can I go back into that space I was in on that trip? And you can kind of use this to actually, talking again about the hindrances from before, you can use this to actually change you into a less like like a less negative kind of emotional space, one that's much more receptive and open. So there's stuff like that that I think is helpful with psychedelics. And I think that even without actually kind of trying to remember to get back into that state, I think there is this sort of hangover is the wrong word because it's not actually negative, but there's a sort of like period after you take psychedelics where you do just have less kind of mental content arising, and you are kind of in just a better space. And I think that's a really good place to meditate from. That's a place where you can make a lot of progress from. So again, I have to kind of be cautious about people taking doses of psychedelics that are beyond what they can handle, or maybe they're emotionally prepared for, because a bad trip can feel like it lasts an eternity, and you don't want that. But I do see that there's a potential, if done carefully, to do something like a psychedelic trip, and then maybe using that to boost the effectiveness of a meditation retreat and things of this nature.
Yeah.
And there's some research on meditation, or sorry, on psychedelics, use of psychedelics with meditators who are on retreat as well. So it's definitely being explored.
Yeah, I think I have also heard of this research. I think what they found is that they had much more success in what they wanted to achieve, right? If I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember too.
Yeah. Regarding the substances, what would you say would be most appropriate to combine with the meditation practice? I mean, psychedelics is a huge group of substances, and there are many, many more probably that will come in the future to the list that the term coins. But what are your experiences? Maybe what substances would you preferably recommend to someone? And yeah.
Okay, I'll say something at least to that. I'll say that I would generally have a preference for substances that do not last for as long. So if someone's looking to decide, I don't know, let's say between something like LSD and magic mushroom psilocybin, for example, do you maybe you don't want your psychedelic trip to last for 12 plus hours. Perhaps a more kind of like manageable duration of the trip is preferable. So yeah, I feel like that's one thing I could say without going too deep into it, Roger.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to recommend anything to anyone who I don't know. So I wouldn't want to give large, general, sort of sweeping advice in this area. Um, it's funny what you're saying, Shaw, because there is that sort of people say like NN-DMT, you smoke it, and it's like this 10, 15-minute trip, but it's just too much all at once, and you can't quite make sense of what just happened. You just, went to Andromeda and back, and and say like, well, you can't really integrate that versus, compared to an ayahuasca trip, which is sufficiently longer. People seem to be able to do a lot more emotional processing with that time duration of the trip. Um, I think I've had some gains from microdosing LSD. So this is like a small amount, but then it kind of lasts the whole day. And I didn't find it helped with meditation per se, because if I were to microdose and then meditate, my mind would be too creative and it'd be too distracting. But then during the day I might be sort of thinking deeper and noticing um, just the more details of the mental content in my mind are sort of arising and passing throughout the day. Um, one substance people are talking about a lot these days is 5-MeO DMT. I don't have the most amount of experience with this, so I'm not really the person to ask, but people who have a breakthrough experience of this suggest, oh, it just essentially it does uh, one thing really sort of quickly, cleanly, succinctly is it just dissolves the ego mind, and without a lot of sort of this bombastic content and firework display that the visuals that come along with other psychedelics. So it's like really just cleanly, quickly, and again, it's a sort of you smoke it, and it's a very short-lasting thing, but it sort of opens you up and sees the symmetry and the centerlessness of all this mind stuff, and you think, oh wow, okay, that's it. But people can have terrible, terrible trips on that as well. I think it can show you the best of what's possible, but also the worst of what's possible in terms of how trapped you can be in the cage of your mind, versus also how liberated you can be.
Yeah, and I think there it is especially important to mention again that the dosage is very critical here, and also the past experiences one probably has with the substance. And so Shawn and I had a few weeks back a conversation also where we talked about whether it was the right step for me to explore 5-MeO DMT. And I actually went ahead and started microdosing it, and then also got into like territory of threshold doses, slightly above that maybe. And um, so far, I can really say the effects are really what you expect actually from a retreat, what you would expect from prolonged periods of concentration practice or insight practice. And really, it's just pushing that to these very deep jhanas in the matter of a minute. So I found it very controllable in these lower dosages. Um, but I'm also, I think, sometimes really getting a taste for, okay, wow, that's really powerful stuff. And so I'm also agreeing with, okay, don't start out like taking a breakthrough dose as some other people are recommending in especially the 5-MeO space. So I don't see really the value in that. I mean, rather going maybe taking a couple of months working really individually through every layer of the resistances that you have in you to opening up to that huge, vast, like nothingness or openness. I think that's really the key to success with that specific substance. But yeah, I'm also not by far no expert on that. So just my very limited experiences with that substance so far. Um, yeah, coming from that topic maybe to something that you are working on right now. So you're both really kind of focusing on your own projects that are actually related to this whole spiritual meditation path. So what are you working on right now? What is really fascinating you, maybe? What are you really trying to get to the bottom of?
Maybe Shawn's work might be kind of a bigger and more interesting topic. I might say for myself, I've recently become really interested in researching um, essentially like pathological behavior and personality disorders as I'm sort of entering more into this space and putting myself more out here on the internet, encountering more people, and seeing the terrain of sort of the spiritual landscape and all these different people involved, and people coming in here with different the different backgrounds and their baggage, and it's one thing to work on yourself and wake up, but we live in a world with other people, and we got to learn how to communicate effectively and peacefully, and something I'm just become really fascinated by. Not quite sure exactly where this is coming from, but researching the psychological work involved, and the place for therapy, how that is a tangential avenue of development alongside waking up, but also cleaning up and seeing. Um, yeah, there's unfortunately sort of many people who had traumatized childhoods, and that stunted their development in some ways, and leads to pathological behavior. And sort of, can you identify these and see these occurrences, and watch out for those people? And so that's something I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add on to that, because I find that it's also like an interesting kind of area, is that I think that especially a lot of these sort of like behavioral patterns that get baked in childhood as kind of like coping mechanisms for dealing with situations that the children don't know how to handle, often those end up kind of getting, I think, repressed from conscious experience. So there isn't a lot of introspective access to that going on. And I think actually, I think it was Ken Wilber that actually made this point, but meditation can't really work well on what you can't perceive in your own conscious awareness. Um, and that means there's stuff where you need input and feedback from others on what you're doing to identify your blind spots and what you can't see um, in your own behavior and things like this. And I think that's like a really important thing for people to be open to and address. And I mean, obviously stuff like therapy, it can be tremendously helpful for this, but even actually just encouraging feedback from those around you, and actually kind of, I mean obviously taking what people say with a grain of salt, but like encouraging people to give you feedback on your behavior and kind of how it may be affecting them, and stuff like this. It's actually really useful information, and people normally don't want to um, they don't want to know that stuff, but I think it can actually be really helpful if used well and used from like an open mind kind of space.
Yeah, and I'll say just another thing. Like Shawn and I have been getting into is a practice called circling. And it's how to have these sort of really deep, authentic, mindful. Uh, I say conversations, but it's more than a conversation. It's different. It's you're being so present and so receptive and so open. It's a very interesting type of um, dialogue practice, and Shawn and I have found it's taken us to interesting places, so we could give each other feedback and reveal things about each other, and like wow, like trying to approach difficult conversations where maybe Shawn and I had a different uh, point of view on something, and just so skillfully and amicably understand one another, where they're coming from, and work together and without conflict. And I think that's something we would like to encourage with our group of meditative.dev as well. And so there's all this like meditation, waking up stuff you can do, but then there's all this other work as well. And you might wake up a lot, but then still be a jackass and not know how to communicate peacefully with people.
Hmm. Yeah. I guess I can now go into a little bit like one of the things that I'm kind of more academically working on, but it has interesting kind of ramifications for how I think about practice and meditation in general is this. It's kind of a computational neuroscience theory called predictive processing, and it's this idea that the mind is kind of a prediction machine that's constantly predicting what's going to appear next in experience. And because it has this sort of mechanistic mathematical way of describing the relationship between perception and attention and action, um, and things like this, it actually really lends itself really well to looking at meditation kind of through that framework. So what I did in my master's degree and what I'll be doing in a PhD if my student visa ever gets approved is basically working with this. It's seeing how we can understand meditation in kind of like a more clear, kind of more sharply defined mathematical way. Because I think what we can get out of that, even in frameworks for meditation, is something that's much sharper and clear than even the kind of like traditional models that we use to understand meditation. So I think that's something that's really promising.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting indeed. Do you have already gotten some kind of practical advice out of that already? Like, how would one start to look in meditation for maybe what you are exploring right now, or maybe have a different view on things? Is that already possible to say, or is that too early?
Um, I can say one thing that I think has been quite useful in my understanding of things that's come out of that is kind of the understanding of like what is concentration practice in meditation. And the Buddhist term typically is shamatha, and meditators will often say something like, okay, like states of high concentration, it's not just about your mind kind of being locked or almost completely locked on the meditation object, but there's this other thing going on there. um, and and kind of, yeah, there's like different ways of talking about the kind of samadhi and concentrated states, but I think actually predictive processing gives this kind of interesting way of looking at it, where you can kind of see like there's kind of like different components or mechanisms involved in concentration that are actually combining together. Um, and while this is somewhat understood, I think people like Rob Berbea, if you're in seeing that Freeze, his book, he can kind of, he has this understanding, but it's sort of the idea that, okay, so there's mindfulness, there's like, you're on the object, you get distracted, you go back, and you get that skill really strong until your mind is very likely to just sit on the object. But there's also where you kind of, you defabricate or soften experience to the point that you're extremely equanimous, and just things, everything that could arise in attention isn't so grabby. It doesn't pull you away with the same force anymore. And and kind of both of those things are tremendously important to investigating experience and doing insight practice. You need both the mindfulness and you need the defabrication. But one thing I think predictive processing can make clear is why that's the case. And as far as kind of our model of reality in our brains, like what's going on there with attention, in terms of, I mean, in predictive processing, it's called precision weighting. So it's kind of this idea of like what's in attention and how strong is that signal from other possible things that could be featured in attention. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of too complicated perhaps to go into here, but I think things like that are where actually predictive processing as a theory can really contribute to more clarity and understanding what's going on with meditation.
Yeah, I actually could really get something out of what you just described, because at one point I found that I think it came to me as some kind of mixture between the TMI model and from seeing that freeze is actually really strong concentration kind of sees the same object in everything. It's kind of not that like you exclude the stuff. It's not like an exclusive process. It feels more like, oh, actually, whenever the mind, you recognize the mind wants to jump to something else, but then you, in that moment, say, ah, I see the breath there, for example. I see that in some kind of very fundamental way, whatever I perceive as something else is actually fundamentally the same. And so it starts like whenever the mind wants to jump, it's actually you recognize it's jumping to something that's fundamentally the same, and so you kind of see the sameness in everything. And this also feels very, very pleasant. It's like very kind of almost the lines blur between these things, and so you started out with the breath and distractions, but then it somehow is only kind of the breath, but then also some parts of it that are like kind of flavored kind of differently a little bit. Does that somehow ring true in that model, or is that something completely different?
I think so. I think that kind of what you're describing is what I think typically is described as kind of like the unification of mind, right? Where, and it's sort of like you get, yeah, what there's a sense of it being a much more sort of like comprehensive, open kind of perception of what's happening. And yeah, you can think of it in another way, like for like attention can much more easily move between different objects. So almost you can just think of it like, imagine like you're oiling the machine of concentration, so it just can so easily slide between, oh, there's a thought and there's this and there's that. um, and it's not like getting like fixated and hung up on a particular one or another one. um, and you can kind of like it with predictive processing, you can actually show this as how, let's say on probability distributions, um, attention changes, and you can do stuff. I believe like show something like it's flattening the probability distributions of attention when you move towards unification of mind. So yeah, I think it's definitely applicable. And while there's not, as far as I know, work being done on this yet, I think that it's coming. And if no one else does it, I'll eventually do it.
It's
So.
coming by you. You're the guy. Hopefully.
Really good.
I need help. I need help. Come on, listeners, get into this
Yeah,
space. Help me
yeah,
out.
probably. Yeah, this is the medium where you like exchange not only ideas but also like the real like fire for these things, where this gets started.
Hmm.
And so yeah, maybe someone is listening and like really wants to get into this deeply themselves. Yeah, maybe we are coming towards the end of the session. Do you have any other topics, maybe any other ideas or nuances that came to your mind that you want to share? So we can have a few more minutes for you to share that.
I'd be curious to hear a little bit about you, Laurie. Whether you asked us what we're working on the moment. What are you practicing?
Yeah,
Seconded.
yeah, yeah. So my practice right now is mainly focused on, I would say, what can be described as deepening of the jhanas. So I know, okay, these are the different jhanas, what they feel like, but I'm really like getting this motivation from Daniel Ingram, where I think he is really skilled at like making out these distinctions in the different jhanas, and then well, I'm curious to find out, okay, what are actually the ingredients here? How can I consciously bring in some more of that? What does it feel like? How can I maybe take out something or what is taking me, um, what is the resistance right now? What is not taking me deeper? What is keeping me from going deeper? So I think this curiosity about these states is just playing out right now. And so fueled by how good all of this is just and how positively it has influenced meditation and life as well. I think I'm just very happy where I'm at and going deeper in this direction. And then, yeah, whatever comes as a side benefit of that, I gladly take. So, yeah, but I'm not really focused on insight practice right now. I feel I have explored that. Maybe that's an excuse, but I have explored that sufficiently, I feel right now. Um, but I'm also sure there's more for me to go in that direction. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now in my practice.
Yeah,
And
that's
also, yeah, you want to comment
no
on
go
that?
go. I
You
was
want
just
to?
going to comment that it's cool to hear you doing the jhanas. Sean and I are a big fan of jhana practice, and yeah, there's a lot of deepening you can do in each one of these, really getting a more and more absorbed, and then you get this ability to like jump jhanas, like start in number three and skip to seven, and like as opposed to
Mm,
going them all sequentially. Um, that's cool. Yeah, it's a fun time.
yeah, definitely. And for this practice, and I've been doing this now for a few weeks with little hits of 5-MeO here and there. This is really where I think it feels like some kind of um, energy that you just get there and you can direct it in these lower dosages just where you want it. And it tends to open up these things more easily. It's like, oh, today I want to explore this. You try for an hour without 5-MeO and you try with. It's like what takes you maybe 30 minutes to develop is like, oh, it's there in a minute. It's like as if your mind just, you have to know what you want. And this is like making the entrance open up and you go there. It's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Not to open up all the conversational threads again, but I see how what you just said relates a lot back to what we were talking about, the benefits of retreat versus daily practice, and then psychedelics. One of the things is getting sufficient energy in the mind, having
Mhm.
enough wakefulness, enough boosted consciousness that a lot of our daily sits, like we're never like fully committing to it, and kind of there's a lot of like wasted hours of kind of half-assing it, and you're not so awake. And then on retreat there will be a lot of that as well, but then you just need these, like, the conditions are right, and there's a 1 hour period in which you're really awake and you can really commit to the practice, and that's when you're more likely to be able to go into the jhanas, or get the insights, get enough sufficient data on the mind to be able to update its parameters. And yeah, psychedelics inject energy into consciousness in a very reliable way, which helps you to, like, okay, I've got the bright mind wakefulness, and then yeah, if you're skillful you can work with that. So anyway, just add that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, do you want to add something there, Sean?
Yeah, more like to before, you're saying how you're not really doing insight practice right now, but I do feel like the jhanas are such a good teacher kind of how defabrication works as you move up through them, that I feel like there's actually a lot of insight value. I mean, and it kind of depends on how you're doing it and where you're putting the emphasis of perception, but there's definitely a lot that we can learn about how the mind constructs phenomena by basically deconstructing it through the jhanas, and then you can also like work backwards into it being more constructed again. So yeah, I kind of feel like you're doing some amount of insight work, even if you're not specifically aiming for that.
Yeah, yeah, that's why I was also hesitant to mention that, because I have had this experience now a lot of times where it's like, how can I even distinguish the two right now? It's like that's insight, but actually I just got here by like different methods of what I insight practice is like. So yeah, that's definitely sometimes it blurs the boundaries between those two. So yeah, definitely true. And also what you said, Roger, about the energy is really something that I only learned in my first retreat. Um, Before that, I thought like, okay, I'm really like I'm concentrating, I'm have a nice experience, it's very comfortable here. Somehow this feels great, meditation is going well, but then only in the first retreat that I actually really experienced like a lot of energy while sitting. Before it was a very comfortable yet kind of spaced out consciousness, not very clear. And so yeah, energy and clarity like really go together, so it's really really important. And with the 5-MeO, it's like that's what you get, because maybe it's a placebo in the lower dosages that's coming in there as well, because you just think you took something really powerful and that like gets you your heart beating and your focus right. But um, there's definitely also something about the substance that's definitely not placebo. So yeah, works great for in this setting for the practice of jhanas. Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds really really interesting. Everything. I mean, we could probably go on deepening all of these topics. Many questions came to my mind, and I would be really happy to have you back on. Do you want to share anything else for the listeners at this point? Maybe where they can find you? I mean, we talked about your website. Anything else there you want to mention?
Shawn, do you want to give a plug for meditative.dev?
Sure, yeah. So if you want to find us, yeah, at meditative.dev, you can find our website. You can find your way onto our mailing list. If you go to the weekly sessions section, you could sign up. And basically, every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Central European time, we are doing about an hour and a half of a combination of meditation and discussion. And yeah, it's a really lovely community there that just continues to surprise in a good way. So yeah, there's definitely that. We've also got a YouTube channel and a Twitter and these things. And yeah, I guess those are more like links that could be included in a description or something.
Yeah, right. Definitely. I will link to all
Right.
of that. And I have been to your weekly meditation session, I think twice or maybe 3 times, not sure really, but really can recommend whatever you are whatever you're teaching there. Every time, really I learned something, or maybe a perspective. I got a new perspective on something that I heard elsewhere, but you are really like giving a very precise and understandable way or view on these things, which I think just for our generation is really, really helpful, not to have to dig through these um, very like dense material of like Buddhist history and really trying to find out what should I do. And so that's really what I think your website and these meetings are really really great for. So I really recommend everyone who is interested in such a framework for their practice or support, check it out. It's really really super super great what you are providing there. Yeah, so
Nice.
Cool. Thank you.
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
uh, I just wanted to say, Lauritz, I really kind of enjoyed actually hearing your take on your experience with the sessions, because that's always like quite useful advice for us to have too. And yeah, I just want to say thanks a lot for this opportunity to have this conversation. It's been awesome.
Yeah, really great. And what I also want to say is, as I listened to both of you during this conversation, I really found that, okay, we have to do this again. I have so many more like points that I want to deepen. And so if you're up to that, I think we can do that again in the future. Yeah, maybe exploring some of those things in more depth when we have more time for one more specific topic. I felt this conversation was a really great overview. Like we touched on many different things. So maybe in the future we have the opportunity to go deeper, and I would really, really be happy to, yeah, have this kind of three-way conversation again.
Yeah, I think we'd love that too. And yeah, thanks very much for the time, and you've provided a really good interview space as well. Really, it's felt really harmonious, congenial, calm. That's been lovely. Thank you,
Yeah.
Laurie.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you as well. Okay. See you next time. Bye.